The perfect MMORPG. Does it exist, or are we all just wasting our time? Let's take a minute and talk about that. So back in October, I did a video titled The Perfect MMORPG. I went and discussed what I thought made a good MMO, how there were several key factors I thought were important to making a successful MMORPG. Towards the end of the video, I tasked you all with an objective: compile a list of what you believe were the most important aspects of what makes an MMORPG worth playing. Key, integral parts of the game that would bring something that would otherwise be mediocre without them into something that you could invest large portions of time into. Thousands of you left comments in that video, and although that is quite an extensive, arduous process to comb through, I did find several reoccurring themes most of you could relate to. So in this video, I want to further delve into what makes the perfect MMORPG. Before we do go any further though, I do want to urge all of you to watch as much of the video as possible, and once you're done, upon completion of the video, just go down into the comment section below and leave your thoughts on the subject. Let me know if you can relate to anything that anyone else has listed here. Let me know if you believe that there is something else, something more important that is necessary to make a successful MMORPG. Because when these kinds of videos get hundreds of thousands of views, they have lots of community interaction, lots of community feedback, and they get a lot of eyes on them from both the community itself and from developers. And who knows what kind of impact that could have on current developers, future developers who are trying to get like a rough gauge of what the actual player base right now wants from a game. Now let's start this off with freedom. The highest rated comment on the video, and subsequently the comment with the most replies attached to it, was from a user named Mayfair B. In it, he or she went on to elaborate on how they believed freedom was the most important aspect of an MMO to them. I can personally relate to that. See, my first MMO experiences were Tales of Pirates and Perfect World International. In both of those games, there was no level cap, at least not an easily obtainable level cap. Instead, you were required to go out and grind monsters, quest through content, participate in dungeons, raids, open world PvP, and the options were almost endless. There were two things that kept me playing those games though: the freedom to participate in whatever content I wanted to without falling too far behind, and the community that supported that playstyle. While yes, gear was and is always going to remain the most important aspect of progression, without it, you won't have the motivation to push new content, right? But then being forced into one single kind of content is kind of limiting. That doesn't mean that I'm saying that you should make gear easily accessible to everyone so that it defeats the purpose of high tier rating. I'm more alluding to the fact that high tier rating doesn't really need to be the only form with which to obtain high tier gear. I mean, I know that endgame is where the vast majority of players play the game, and participating in endgame content like raids is where the best gear comes from. And that is more than fine. I am definitely of the opinion that players should be rewarded for the amount of effort they put into the game, and raiding takes a lot of coordination, a lot of practice and effort. But providing players alternate means of obtaining gear, making it more of a non-linear progression, is definitely something we should think about. I know that some MMOs like Final Fantasy XIV have like raids and then Savage raids, and then World of Warcraft has things like Mythic Plus dungeons and Mythic raids. So the, I guess, concept is there being utilized in at least some capacity. Next, we have the leveling experience. I saw multiple top comments, two of which I'll list here are from Asar, Tony, and Cunny in specific, where they go on to talk about leveling and how drastically it's changed over time. Asar Tony mentions that leveling in both Terra and Blade and Soul specifically, both games of which I have actually played at max level. See, when beginning Terra, way back when it was still pay to play, the leveling experience was just so much different than it is now. I had to do side quests to get additional XP to continue to unlock new quests. I had to group up with an entire group of players to push into dungeons, and then we partied up while in the original newbie zone because that area was just so AIDS that nobody wanted to run it ever again. Everything took time, and you were much more involved in the world. You were required to do more, and as such, there were more players running around actually engaging in the world itself. And the same applies to Blade and Soul. So then, my question is, when did truncating the leveling experience become the new norm? See, these developers, they create these worlds filled with personality, filled with character, filled with NPCs, monsters, world bosses, items, gear, and then now they're just having you kind of skip over and rush through so much of it. See, right now, the developers are of the impression that rushing players to endgame is what players actually want out of an MMO. They want to participate in the same content over and over and over, and that is what's going to keep them playing indefinitely, when in reality, that is the complete opposite of what players want. Yes, some players do want to hit max level as fast as possible so they can sit there AFK decaying queue, but a lot of us actually enjoy the journey to max level, and pushing new players to skip the majority of what made the game a wonder to be a part of originally is partly responsible for killing it. I believe that while yes, endgame is definitely important, it does not have to be the only form of content that takes time. Leveling through a brand new world should be an experience in and of itself. How many of you guys remember tiered content in MMOs, back when gear mattered, back when you'd want to run leveling dungeons not for the XP, but for the actual gear? See, these days, people don't do dungeons as a means of experiencing what these dungeons have to offer. Instead, at least traditionally, these dungeons offer more XP than questing does, so people try to do these dungeons to get through the content as fast as possible. This way, they don't actually have to experience the majority of the game. Yet back a decade ago, dungeons used to take several times longer. They had much more difficult mechanics and offered incentives for people running them in the form of gear that normally lasted you several levels. And trust me, those levels used to take a while to obtain, so the gear you would get from these dungeons were a necessity. This meant that people were actually running content with a mindset of actual progression and achievement even at lower levels, which is something that is predominantly done at endgame these days. Following up on the leveling experience, I would like to talk about a topic brought up by NL Clark and Saib Cromwell: building relationships within the community and the community itself. See, a lot of video games these days are built around solo play in mind. There's no denying that. MMOs, however, were never built to be played alone, thus the term massively multiplayer was coined. Yes, the definition of an MMO has changed drastically over time, but the term is still defined as featuring a large group of people within the same world concurrently. Open world MMOs, sandbox MMOs, hub-based MMOs, they're all still MMOs, and they still allow for players to group up, to chat, and participate in content together. That is the purpose of a community, to work with other people towards a common goal. Years ago, players used to know who everyone was on a server. You built relationships with other players, you knew the leaders of different guilds, you knew who the dominant guild was on your server, and you often worked hard to be a part of them. You had friends you would run regular content with. You actually knew when someone was new, and if you were so inclined, even went as far as offering to help them out if they needed it. Today in MMOs, though, everything is just so contrastingly different. Very few people care enough these days to really help you out with the leveling experience because it's just such a mind-numbing rush to endgame. You see people out in the world and you're like, hey man, how's it going? And you know what happens? They completely ignore you. Why? Because they don't care. They don't have the time to really waste on you. Guilds are no longer a means for people to recruit friends or like-minded individuals. Communities no longer really know who the majority of one another are. The community aspect of the genre is in a much different state these days than it was. I honestly don't really know what could be done to remedy the situation. See, I am not from this generation of gamer. This generation of gamer is much more focused, much more obsessed with hitting endgame as fast as possible and skipping all the content that takes place in between on the journey to endgame. And this kind of playstyle, this kind of mindset is, I don't know, I guess showing developers where they need to focus their attention, and that is, of course, on endgame. Regardless, friends make MMOs more enjoyable to play. Whether you begin the game with friends or you make them in-game, friends are an important part of playing an MMO, and today's MMOs just feel far too solo for me. Having a system in place that has players return to lower level content and even mid-level content not only helps the game feel more alive as they're not all forced into a small endgame zone, but it also helps the new player experience. I mean, honestly, what better way is there to show a new player, that the game is alive and thriving than to have players of all levels participating in content of all levels? And then there were basic things like, I want the game to look like Black Desert, or I want combat as good as insert game here. The most relatable opinions on what made an MMO perfect were the freedom to play how you want, the journey to endgame as opposed to the endgame itself, and the community. I can understand all three of the above. Freedom prevents boredom since you're not forced into following a linear form of progression, allowing you to progress into areas you want. The leveling experience is important because endgame is only one singular part of the game. Content, difficulty, variety, they are all very different parts of keeping the game feeling alive and exciting on the way to the inevitable end. The community being helpful, being welcoming, being friendly is important. Nobody likes toxicity, and that is a surefire way of alienating your player base. We are all here to play MMOs together. We want to work together with other players to experience the game and enjoy our journey until it is time to ultimately move on. I'm well aware that at the end of the day, the perfect MMORPG is something completely subjective to every individual player. Everyone has different likes and dislikes, everyone likes different forms of combat, everyone enjoys different narratives and different forms of storytelling. No MMORPG is for every player, and as such, there will likely never be a universally accepted perfect MMORPG. Nevertheless, that does not mean that we can't continue developing MMOs in the right direction. And that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about though. I enjoy the MMO genre immensely. Not only is it my job now, but it's also the gaming genre that I have spent the most time in. 2020 is looking to be a pretty solid year for releases. I actually have a video of what we can look forward to next year if you're interested in checking that out, but otherwise, I'm curious. Like last time, what do you think specifically makes an MMORPG stand out amongst the rest? What is the most important aspect of an MMO that without it would drive you from playing it? The more conversations we have like this, the better. Let your voice be heard and let the developers and the community alike know what we want. But that's just your guys' opinion, your impressions of the perfect MMORPG. Yeah, this was a little different, huh? So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below and let's talk about it. Anyway guys, that is it for me. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.
Someday soon, I'm gonna make it. Yeah, all hard work's gonna